some opportunities for rescheduling, for some restructuring of investigations that can perhaps improve. We look at ways of doing some reassessment, reallocation in investigators. The other key thing is when we look at patrol, we were given the task of looking at, okay, how many patrol officers would we need if 40% of their time is not being used on specific activities, either a call for service, a car stop, something like that, or on admin time. That 40% is very generous. We have seen very few departments that can get to that 40% unobligated time figure. Much more typically, you'll see departments get at about 30%. So we wouldn't recommend trying to get to 40%. It takes an awful lot of officers. We don't think that is nearly as productive as beginning to think about how to better allocate people and use the time for community policing activities. Working with citizens, going to meetings, spending time talking to people, a very different sort of thing than just responding to a call or making a traffic stop, those sorts of things. We offer in the report a strategy that is multifaceted. First of all, there are things the department can do right now without adding people to begin to move toward a community policing model. Included are creating a system of officers owning beats so that they know what's going on in a particular beat. They work that beat over time. They have information about that beat. And in addition, they don't get calls outside that beat unless absolutely necessary. So that's one key part. The other parts are creating over time a north-south division so that there's more geographical accountability and responsibility. There's another key part of the department needs to have a ComStat meeting where there is information or there are discussions about the kinds of things that are going on in the city. So it's not just about crime, but it's also about neighborhood issues. How do you blend then the issues or the work that police departments do that take into account both crime, neighborhood issues, so that over time there's less crime, there's less disorder, things work much better than they do now. And we offer a number of recommendations for that. We look at the second phase as a much more decentralized fashion. It's a different structure. It takes accountability into account. It adds some managers to make sure that they are responsible for not only their time of day, but also for the turf that they manage. And we think over time that is doable here, probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years out as the budget things intensify. And I think that that will serve the citizens of Anchorage very, very well. I think people will like to see more interaction between the officers and the community at community meetings and all kinds of both formal and informal ways that will happen. We did find, and again, this was not a specific focus, but this is a good police department. I think that Anchorage has a very good agency, lots of very dedicated people that are working hard, that are trying to protect the community. We think that there are some things that can improve it, but they're more incremental. There's no huge problems in this agency as we have seen in some agencies that we've worked in. I think that's a huge compliment to the men and women, both sworn and non-sworn, that work for the Anchorage Police Department. I think the citizens of Anchorage are lucky to have a department that is by and large in very, very good shape. And with that, that's a quick overview I've got.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Questions? Yes, Grace.
Is there a timeline for implementation of these ideas?
Well, what will happen is the chief and I will be in consult from this point on to talk about what we can do immediately, and there are some recommendations that are fairly easy to implement. And then others, as the chief mentioned, will take time, and in some cases we may not implement all of the suggestions. So no set timeline yet, but that's something that we'll be working on from this point forward. We just now have the report, so our next step is to develop what is the action plan from here.
And also, I'm sorry, one more question. On page 10, it says here that the department is going to need 58 more positions, and you said that we've got this $25 million budget shortfall. Any way of...
Well, as Dr. Fraser said, that is under the 40% unallocated time scenario. That's the ideal goal that we'd like to get to down the road, but as he mentioned, that's not the realistic projection in the short term. In the short term, we know that we're probably not going to be able to expand. So again, as he mentioned, that's kind of a down the road goal, not an immediate goal. Glenn?
Mayor, while I said the report shows how we could reallocate current forces and then expand in the general, does the report give any indication, should you be forced to make cuts within the police department, where they might occur?
It does.
Uh,
Do you have a copy?
Not yet, no.
Okay, we'll get you a copy. Rather than me trying to read statistics to you, there is a section in there that does talk about if there are reductions required, where those might happen.
Okay, thank you.
And the impact of those as well.
Yes, and the impact of those as well. Very good. Yes.
The report also mentioned that the need for more managers, is that something that could affect, is that possible with the budget shortfall? I'm assuming that the managers make more money than other officers.
Again, I think the addition of personnel is something that happens in phase one. Our initial phase is a status quo, the force as it exists today, what can we do today to enhance our deployment and community policing. The next phase is when we're able to add managerial staff.
Do you know what change we can expect first? I mean, is there one priority that comes from this report that people will be able to see a tangible difference in the department or on the street? Or?
Well, that's where the chief and I will be meeting over the next week or two to talk about what it is that we can implement right away. And there are some things. And Chief, if you want to speak to any of those.
Some of the changes involve changing the organizational structure in minor ways, but that's how we build our budget, and that's done every year. We have to do that January 1 anyway. So I haven't discussed this with the mayor yet, so maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I'm thinking that we should probably spend the rest of this year planning for something like a January 1 implementation, or maybe the first patrol rotation after January 1, which I think is in February. But using the fall, using the budget process to build a budget around these models, and or as much of it as we can afford to do, and maybe start it off in the first of the year. As far as which ones we turn on first and which ones you'd see first, I'm not sure I have absorbed enough of the report yet that I could say today. Some of the recommendations, frankly, are things that we just go, yeah, we're doing it, or we can do it. It's very easy to accomplish. Some of them are going to take a little bit more work. And we haven't ranked them yet. We're just starting to go through and that analysis now of, yeah, these are the no-brainers, these are the ones that are going to take some work, these are the ones we have some questions about. It's going to take us a month or so just to get our minds around that.
Rosemary?
Well, I believe the report says at minimum we should have, even with a tight budget, a dispatch manager, 3 patrol sergeants. Is that something you're looking at, or are we actually looking at cutting people from next year's budget?
A little too soon to say. We're preparing the budget right now, and we're in discussion with each of the departments about some of their suggestions for greater efficiency. So a little premature to say that in any department that we're going to add or cut.
Okay. And then Dr. Fraser talked about it said our investigators aren't doing as much work as other investigators around the country, or something to that effect.
We look at the workload of investigators in 2 ways. One is the sort of cases per month that they work typically. And in Anchorage, they're lower than we typically would see in other agencies. Secondly, there's some formulas that we use in terms of the time that it takes to do thorough investigations. Those 2 things together show that detectives have some ability to be restructured to do some more work. For example, right now there are a number of cases that are not assigned for investigation that really don't get any follow-up. And detectives should have time to follow up those cases by just making phone calls. 2 things happen. If you make a phone call on a case that is sort of sidetracked because there's just nothing there, I mean, you're not going to spend very much time investigating it because there's not much there. But a phone call will do 2 things. Sometimes it will get more information that will then put the case into one that can be followed up on, more investigation, but it also helps reassure the victim. And I think those are 2 critical factors that the department should consider as they look at the time available for detectives.
If I could jump in on that just a little bit, there was a recommendation that in fact, I don't remember now if it was an actual recommendation or just a discussion, but many departments use formal solvability factors to determine, when a case gets assigned in detectives. And that's sometimes it's a complicated form that you fill out and you score them and all that to determine whether or not this case gets assigned and worked. We don't do that at the APD, although we've talked about it off and on for years. PERF discusses another method of cutting, of establishing your case assignment priorities through cases that are, what were the terms, routine,
Typical, more complex, and less complex.
and less complex. So 3 categories. And maybe adding a 4th category, which is just a callback category. We don't intend to work the case, but we want to make